What's up, everybody? Welcome to another awesome Redshift tutorial. I'm Liam Clisham, and today I'm going to talk to you about using proxies inside of Cinema4D and Redshift and how that can really speed up your workflow by not loading in a ton of geometry. And then I'm going to do a quick little snippet on AOVs and rendering a depth pass and how to bring it into Photoshop or whatever application you're working with to composite things. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so here's our scene from the hero picture that I set up in the beginning, except there's no trees here, there's no forest. And so that's what we're gonna be working on setting up. We're gonna start working on setting up the forest and trees using Redshift proxies. So to get into that, I'm gonna go into this file here, and you'll see it's just blank. There's nothing going on except for a dome light so we can see our scene. And I'm gonna merge a few objects. And so I'm gonna go into this assets folder and bring in this stump FBX. Don't want to rename, just select, there we go. And there's our FBX file. And so it just looks like a normal asset. And I'm gonna rename this to stump01 and go down to File, Export, Redshift Proxy. So I'm going to choose this Proxies folder, and I'm not going to hit save yet, but I just want to show you all the options that are available in a proxy. So the reason you want to use proxies are it doesn't load any of the geometry into your scene. It's just going to bring in either a very low level of detail proxy, or you can set it to just be the bounding box, or you can set it to be nothing. And then it only loads when it's time to render. And I believe if I've done my research right, it only loads what is in the camera view too. So it culls everything else. So it really can speed up your render times. So in the export settings, what you're going to get are either to export selected objects, or you can export your entire scene, which is really awesome. So if you're working on a really complex scene and then you want to start adding more stuff into it, you can just export the entire scene, start a new file, bring it in as a proxy, and then start working with it. And you can do all your look dev right here, and then any other extra work you can do here. And it keeps your file really light and nimble and being able to move around quickly. And with that, being able to export your entire scene, you can export the lights, polygon connectivity. You can compress the data so you can make the file really small. You can set your origins to world origin or object bounds. And then when you hit OK, you can choose to either have it add the proxy to the scene or not add it. You can set what that proxy's name is going to be, and then remove the object that you're turning into a proxy if you want to. And the other cool thing is it carries over animation too. So it's kind of like an advanced Limbic file, but specifically built for Redshift. So it carries over animation, polygon information, texture information. Even though it doesn't say it here, if you put a texture on this and you hit export, it's going to carry it over. And I'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to hit cancel. And so I've got this stump texture pre-built right here. Bring that on, and you'll see it's got the details here. And I even have some displacement on here. So if I want to add displacement, I'm going to go down to Redshift tags, Redshift object, and under geometry, just hit override. And displacement, turn that on. You'll see it gets a little bit of shift right there and some extra displacement to it to really pick up those grooves. So I'll bring this down here, and let's go ahead and bring in another object. So we'll go here, assets, and we'll do the other stump that I have. Bring that in. We can just rename this to stump02. Bring that down. This is going to have some displacement too, and this one's already built. So we'll go ahead and throw that on there, slide this over, and we can scale this up too. So now we've got two stumps, both have displacement, both have materials on them, and one more final tree. We're just going to load in this third one here. Come on, there we go. Hit OK. That's looking tall enough. Slide that over, and I've got the texture built right here. And this isn't really a stump, it's kind of a tree, so we'll just name it Tree01. And I think this even has some displacement on there too. Let me just go in and see, yep, just a little bit of displacement on there. So now we've got these three set up. And I'm gonna export these individually because I want to have more control over them when we get into our next file. So again, File, Export, down to Redshift Proxy. And I'm gonna go into this Proxies folder that we have set up and just name this tree 01, hit OK. And I don't need any lights, compressed data is fine. I don't need to add this to the scene and I don't need to remove that. And world origin's fine because we can adjust that when we get into the next scene, and there's no animation, so just hit OK. And that's that. And if it's a really big file, you might see down here some notifications going that it's running and all that. So I'm just going to do this again, export, Redshift Proxy, go into Proxies, and this will be stump 01, or this one's actually 02. Let me go back and make sure I name that correctly. Stump 02. That's good. And this 01. And one more time. This is one of those moments where you can probably hit fast forward for a second while I do this. Stummo, okay. Good typing. Liam, stump 01. And while I'm right here, just go ahead and rename this to stump. There we go. Cool. So we've got all these saved out. And I'm going to go ahead and just close this. All right, so we're back in our original file here. And so what we're going to want to do is start bringing in our proxies and using them in a cloner, or we can set them up manually and scatter them around so they can be instances and really keep our scene light and nimble. And then everything's going to be calculated here by Redshift. And that way, as you move around the viewport, as we have a ton of polygons, it's not bringing your system down, and then at render time, it still looks great. So first thing I'm going to do is start turning off some of this stuff. Everything from like these dishes all down to the log should be turned off. If you hold Control and Alt at the same time, you can turn those off. On a Mac, it's probably Command and Alt. It's been a while, I forget, I'm sorry, but I think that's the same deal. And then I'm going to go ahead and get out of this camera view, and we can bring in our first proxy. So if you go into File, Merge Objects, here's our first stump, hit Open. You'll see we can kind of see it there. I'm going to go ahead and throw in another dome light just so we can see things a little better. So there's our dome light. And looking at it, you see it here, which is exactly what a proxy should be doing. You can see we have all of our textures, displacements all carried over. But in here, it's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to bring the stump down in the bottom here. And if I bring this up, you can see there's a really thin line that is the bounding box of this object. And, that's well and good if you don't have a dark scene that you're working with, but sometimes it's really hard to see. So over here in your attributes, you get some settings like the path, show bounding box. So if I uncheck that, it goes away completely. You just get this axis here. If I do preview, you get bounding box, and it's going to fill in the bounding box. So that way you really can kind of see what you're working with. If you're setting up your camera, you can see where all the boxes are that are either in your way or could be inhibiting your view and things like that. But I really like to just load up a mesh. And what that's going to do is bring in a really low level detailed mesh. And if you want to bring it down even more, you can control that here. I usually like setting it about 80. That might be a bit too much since it's already converted down a lot. 90 should be about right for this stump here. We can get it right here on the plane and pretty much be all set with that. So I'm going to go ahead and add it into a cloner. I've got a cloner object right here. I can just click on that while holding Alt, and it'll automatically put it into this cloner. And we're going to turn this into a grid array. We don't really need any on the Y, just one there. And we're going to spread this out, probably like 15 by 20, and it could be like 2000 by 1500. We'll try that. So we get all these stumps just like that, really fast, really easy. You can start moving around, working on our scene, and it keeps up really well. If you want to be really fast, you can go in undersampling and crank it all the way up to 3. I already had it at 2. So just really light and nimble and easy to work with. So that's great. It kind of looks all the same. So why don't we go ahead and bring in our next object, and we're going to do the same thing. Bring in stump 02, bring this down to here. And I'm going to turn on my mesh so we can see what's going on. You can see we get all the different meshes in there, and that's all right. It's still kind of a little too organized. So in our cloner, I'm going to go ahead and go in here and make sure I turn on instances. I forgot to do that. You can see it will still use these as instances, which is really awesome. So it keeps everything light. And I'm going to go ahead and turn fix clone off just so everything aligns the way I want. And under clones, instead of iterate, I'm going to go down to random, and you'll see things start to shuffle around randomly, but that's still not exactly what I want. So why don't we go ahead and go in and grab a random effector. So I've got all my effectors right here, or you can grab them from MoGraph effector. So I'm going to grab mine right here. And I don't think I actually grabbed it. Try this one more time. Random. There we go. And under parameters, I don't need any on the Y. And this we can probably do 500 by 500. And I'm going to turn my rotation around and just rotate these a little bit so they get a little bit more differentiation as they move around. And I probably need to spread these out more. So how about adjust the seed a little bit, and we can go a little bit wider around here and a little bit longer here. That way they're really getting spread out. And I realize I could probably use less counts and really finesse a few less, but this just makes it fast and easy. I know that I want a lot and I want them scattered around, and so this does that, and then I can adjust my sizing so I get the spacing exactly how I want. So the last thing we're going to bring in is our tree, which is right here. We're going to do the same thing, bring it down here, throw it in there, and then it starts being scattered around with the rest of this. So if I go back into my original camera setup, that's looking pretty similar. Looks like the tree trunk needs to come down a little bit. So I'm going to adjust that Y there, make sure it's really hitting the ground plane. It's looking about right. And I think if we kill the dome light now, we'll get our same mood back for the most part. So the only thing that I probably need to do, and we can mess with it when we bring the bike in, is figure out where things are placed. But once we get that going, what if things don't look the way we want? So we did all this texturing before, and it seems to fit well now, but what if you have a director that comes back and you need to change something? You don't want to have to go back in and make another proxy and then another material and deal with all that. So you can actually change that in the proxies. So for giggles, let's say we've got an art director that came by and said, we need to update this tree with more moss or something along those lines. So under materials, you can choose where you get your materials from. So it could be from the proxy file, it can be from an object, or it can be from the scene. And if you just do object, you can go ahead and replace it. So I believe it should be this one here. If I drag that over, it'll update just like that. And if I come out of this view, let's go find a tree that's close to a light source. Probably right about here. I see these big bounding boxes. I'm not sure that's going to be enough to do it. All right, I'm going to throw a dome light in just one more time so we can see what's going on. All right, so we've got these trees, and this tree doesn't have any texturing done to it very well, so it's going to be black. But you can see it just updates it just like that. And if you want to go back to the original, you just hit delete, and it goes gray, and we can go in and do from proxy file, and it will update just like that. So very easily you can start doing look dev without having to change a ton of stuff. So I'm gonna go back into this and turn off our dome light again and start turning our other stuff back on. We've got all this here to bring back in. And that tree is right through it. So why don't we try spreading this out a little bit. That's starting to look almost where I had it before. It's looking pretty good. Nothing weird going on. I'm gonna go ahead and turn my mesh on just to really make sure. And cloner, I'm gonna spread this out even more. Maybe a different seed. How about that? I kind of want something more in the foreground, so I kind of liked, where was it? There's one. Oh, there it is. Going too fast. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We've got one right there. And I'm gonna go ahead and select my bike and rotate around it just a little bit, maybe pull back. It's looking pretty good. We've got that tree that's right there, but I can go ahead and move this back. You'll see it updates really fast because all these are instances and proxies, so it's really not calculating geometry. And so that's starting to look pretty good. It's not exactly how I had the original setup, but that's okay. I think that's where I want it. And you'll see under my camera, I've got some depth of field going, and that's for a whole nother tutorial. And I've got volumetrics going right here. So I've got this environment and all my lights are contributing to that. And if you haven't seen it in a previous tutorial, we have a whole tutorial on doing God rays and volumetrics really fast inside Cinema4D and Redshift. Just a few clicks and you can do it. And it's way faster than any other third-party renderer that I've used so far. So we've got this scene. Now, what if we want to tweak some stuff in post? What if we decide that we want a depth map because it's taking too long to render for whatever reason? So, I've got this pretty much how I imagine it. I'm going to go ahead and just kill depth of field in here. So under bokeh, just kill that. And so now we don't have our depth of field, but I've got my camera right about where I want it. And I'm going to go into render settings, Redshift, and go over to AOV. So AOV is multipass. And here you can do everything, a depth field. You can do ambient occlusion, just a background. You can get a beauty image, which is, what you normally render out flattened. Bump normals, caustics raw. A puzzle mat, which is basically, if you think of it as a puzzle of RGB, so one object will be red, one will be green, one will be blue, and kind of continues through that. That way you can kind of separate things out a little bit easier. So for this, I'm going to do a depth map, which I've already got selected. And you'll get a bunch of options when you do this. So you can choose filter type if you want a full, minimum depth, maximum depth, center sample, so just right in the center there. I'm doing full because I want it from 0 to 1. And the way I'm going to get that 0 to 1 is by selecting Z normalized. If you do Z by itself, it's going to be 0 to whatever the camera sees. So if I uncheck that, it won't let me reset it, but it's usually up to like 100,000, and that's not what we want. We want normalized. And then multipass output, we want to check enabled here. And I'm not going to do a multi-part EXR. I really want a separate file here. And file output, you just hit enabled and you're all set. And you'll see that multipass is checked here. And then when you go to save, you can do save and choose it wherever you want. So let's do renders in here, and we'll just say for YouTube. And we're going to call this tutorial regular image. That sounds about right. And then this one for YouTube, we're going to call this tutorial MP for multipass. If we hit save and hit Shift R to render, we'll see it starts rendering, and then I get my little feedback display going, which I have pop up now. I don't need that really for this. So this is going to start going, and it's doing its passes for the point cloud, and that will take a second to cache, and then it will do its full render. Go ahead and go up to say 65%. That should fit pretty well. And you'll see it chug along. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this part so you don't have to sit through this rendering, and I'll talk to you in a few seconds. All right, so now our render's done, and we're going to jump into Photoshop and take a look at the depth pass that was rendered out and what you can do with it. So inside Photoshop, we've got our depth pass on top here, and then our beauty image at the bottom. So with the depth pass, you can't really do too much to begin with. You know, you can multiply it so the back stays light and the front gets dark based on the values in there. You can do the reverse through a dodge or lighter color. And you can kind of just mess around with it however you want. So I'm just going to leave it at normal and unselect that. So what I've done just ahead of time is copy this background layer, and I have a program called, or a plugin called Redshift Lens Care. If I go into that, you'll see that you can do depth maps here. And I'm not going to walk through how to use Redshift because you can download it yourself and mess with it. But it'd be the same thing if you're compositing inside of Nuke or Fusion or After Effects. You can use this map to drive your depth. So when I turn that off, here's the original beauty image, and here's it applying the plugin to it. And it's not perfect, it's just really fast. It didn't take all the data, like some of the areas in front here need to be blurred more, and this could have a little bit more blur to it. But for a baseline to start working with and compositing your images, this is how you go about doing that. So when you render out AOVs and multipass from Redshift, you can start incorporating it this way. You can build deep EXR files, which means that everything's baked into an EXR. So you'll have your depth map, and you'll have a beauty pass, and you'll have position pass, and everything all inside one EXR file. I personally like to have them separated out. I feel like they're a little bit easier to work with depending on which compositing program you're working with. Sometimes a depth map will get read wrong, and it will be put in a red channel when it needs to be in its own channel, or certain things like that. So really, AOVs are quite easy to work with as long as you know what they're gonna do and their purpose. And I don't think it's a good idea to take the time to go through each one individually, because that's pretty much taking a render and then another render and another render and another render and going back and forth between a bunch of different programs all at once. So I'm going to keep it really simple with just this depth pass, and hopefully that gets you an idea. Check out the Redshift manual on the site. If you have a proper Redshift login, it's right there. You just go into support, find whatever program you're using. For us, it's Cinema4D, and you can start going through the manual, looking at AOVs and what each one does and its purpose. This is a forewarning that it seems like in a couple weeks that they're going to be revamping how AOVs are done, so you can start doing more custom attributes, things like that. And that's a huge discussion that's going on the forums right now. So, this AOV pass may become outdated in a couple weeks. So just keep that in mind. All right, everybody, thank you so much for all the participation that you've been doing and commenting with these and the live streams every Thursday. If this is your first time watching one of my tutorials, every Tuesday we're going to release a new tutorial on Redshift, and then every Thursday we do a live stream across various platforms. So if you follow me on Twitter @_5 FIVE numeral 31, so FIVE 31, or Brograph. It's at Brograph, same as the title. We post when we're going to be streaming. It's usually around 8 o'clock Central Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. It fluctuates sometimes depending on people's schedules, but that's generally a good baseline to figure it out. So again, every Tuesday a new tutorial comes out. Every Thursday we do a live stream based around whatever. So if I was talking about AOVs one week, we're going to talk about AOVs for a little bit, and then you guys can just throw questions at me and do silly stuff. And also check out my website, www.5-31.com, to find out more about schedules and the tutorials I'm going to be releasing. I have a calendar there. And then also check out Brograph's new Slack. It's brograph.com/Slack. And you can come on there and ask me questions too. So if you're a listener of the podcast or if there are other tutorials, anyone can come in, sign up, and jump on Slack and ask us questions about Redshift, Octane, Cinema4D, and anything else motion design related. All right, guys, thank you so much again, and I look forward to talking to you on Thursday.